Which Canadian government officials were paid $11 million in bribes from Pfizer back when they just announced COVID, all the way until the rollout of the jabs? New information is emerging thanks to a doctor who says it's very important that we expose this. I would tend to agree with him. You see, Pfizer faced a whistleblower lawsuit from a former compliance manager who says he flagged this fraud that happened towards numerous countries, China, Canada, and others. And it's up to us to name and shame through a FOIA. Canadian residents need to know which government officials received this bribe money. So thank you, Dr. Byram Bridle. Some of you know who he is. So Dr. Byram Bridle wants this to get out there. He is a viral immunologist, pathologist, was speaking out since 2020 about something not being right about this whole thing. Of course, government officials tried to quiet him down. Oh, is that the same government officials that we realized that Pfizer bribed just as COVID was declared? Well, thank you, Dr. Bridle, for getting this out through your Substack. I want to help you to get the word out because he would like people to do a FOIA on it. Because again, we need to name and shame. They cannot get away with this. So here we go. Potentially influential government officials in Canada and China were paid excessively by Pfizer at the onset of COVID-19 and up to the rollout of the shots. Who and why? So, a news article from 2023 was brought to his attention today. It described a whistleblower lawsuit against Pfizer. So, Pfizer faces whistleblower lawsuit from former compliance manager who says he flagged possible fraud in China. And it's going to go on to say that when he exposed this to his boss, and sorry, it's also Canada as well. We'll get into that in the information that he put out. When he took it to his boss, what happened? He was told to be quiet and he was fired. So this can be found at this link here. And I will get to that link in a minute because it's a whole separate article. So, as Dr. Byron says, it deals with payments made by Pfizer spanning the declaration of the COVID pandemic and leading out to the global rollout of their shots. It alleges that Pfizer committed fraud related to foreign corrupt practices. When Doctor read the article, he found two details in the story to be particularly disconcerting. First, he learned a new term. Apparently, there are potentially influential government officials called pigos, pigs, that pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer target monetarily. This term both bothered the doctor, and the purpose of the payouts seemed to be at odds with conflict of interest policies that are supposed to be enforced in countries like Canada. Second, alongside China, Pfizer targeted Canada's pigos, I like to call them pigs, through a disproportionately large budget. So we're going to get into that, meaning Canada's such a small country population wise, economy wise, doctor wise. Why was Canada paid so much compared to our population, our economy? We're going to get into that. We're just so corrupt here. That's why. So the story focused on the fact that Pfizer may have committed fraud by targeting potentially influential government officials, a name they have, like pigos. So we're going to talk about China quickly first because it matters. China was the one where we know this whole thing started, and they did a mass payout to government officials there just before and when COVID was starting. So a disproportionately large sum of money, over 10 times the amount of money compared to what was paid out to government officials in the US. However, as a Canadian, the doctor found the following facts to be of concern. Specifically, Pfizer spent $168 million on pigos in China between the second quarter of 2019 and the third quarter of 2021. Hans Work found, and we're going to get to who Hans is. He's the Pfizer guy that worked there. That compared to 12 million in the US, 11 million in Canada, 7.5 million in Russia, and 7.1 million in the UK. The 11 million paid by Pfizer to Canadian pigos, and yes, we need to find out who those influential pigos are that accepted the money. Name and shame. Let's remember that campaign, the name and shame campaign. It's concerning because it almost equals that allocated to influencing the USA, 11 million Canada, 12 million USA. But he says our economic footprint is about 12 times smaller, and our pharmaceutical market is approximately 18 times smaller here in Canada. This means that Pfizer's budget devoted to targeting government officials in Canada was like the one targeting Chinese officials, disproportionately large after adjusting for the size of the pharma market within each country. It's troubling to learn that Pfizer invested so much money into government influencers in China at the time leading up to both the declaration of COVID pandemic and the rollout of their shots. But why was Canada so disproportionately targeted? Historically, our public health institutions often followed the lead of the USA. So, why invest an almost equal amount of money into the much smaller market that Canada represents when influence was already being exerted on our big sibling, the US, he means? Could this also constitute a breach of foreign corrupt practices laws? We're going to get into the fact that this whistleblower, who was a compliance manager, so his job was looking through to see if there's anything that could be deemed fraudulent, he could not believe in that quarter how much money went to these particular government officials. It was so out of whack with what was normal, he flagged it and got fired for it and is suing Pfizer for the dismissal of this. And he's trying to let the world know this happened. So everyone's obsessed with the corruption coming out about the Epstein files. We can't miss this one. So the doctor says, in his opinion, this information deserves serious discussions and investigations. Importantly, every government official that receives pig money, I say pig, should have to disclose it to the public and indicate what it was used for. As a Canadian, I would like to know which government officials in Canada accept pig money so I can take that into consideration alongside their public health messaging. I wonder if Bonnie Henry, who's actually a government official, I wonder if she received any because they're deemed official public health officers. Was it just government politicians or was it the health officers across Canada? We won't know until someone very brilliant does an FOI. And I know people that love doing FOIs, and I'm going to send this to them right after this. If you know people that love to do FOIs, please send this episode to them. So he says, especially as it applied to interventions related to COVID. The problem is, good doctor here can't find any info in online public databases to explain what happened to Pfizer's 11 million paid out to these government officials in Canada. He doesn't like the idea that this money can be distributed to government officials without the public being able to readily find out who received it. So if someone gives you $1 million, you're going to do the messaging that you're told to do to get your payout. End of story. That's how it works. He says perhaps Access to Info and Privacy Act, ATIP, Freedom of Info Act, FOIA requests would be required to get this information. If any readers have evidence showing any Canadian government officials receiving portions of Pfizer's $11 million, please share them in his comments. And this is viralimmunologist.substack.com. Please go and follow him. And thank you for this article, Dr. Bridle. He also says, likewise, please comment if you have ideas as to why Canada's government, alongside China, our biggest buddy these days, was disproportionately, based on market size, targeted by Pfizer. I don't know, maybe because they know we're so freaking corrupt up here in the north that you can buy whoever you want. He says, after all, and like many others, I would like the healthcare policies that are imposed on me to be free from financial influences of pharma companies. So go and follow his Substack. Let's get to the article about this whistleblower. All right, Pfizer faces whistleblower lawsuit from former compliance manager who says he flagged possible fraud in China. After Pfizer allegedly fired a compliance manager for raising the flag on potential fraud activity in China, the former employee is hitting back. Frank Hahn, the former director of global compliance analytics at Pfizer, has filed a civil complaint against the drug maker. In the California lawsuit, Hahn claims he was terminated for identifying potential Foreign Corrupt Practices Act (FCPA) issues within the company. He worked for Pfizer from May 2017 to November 2022, according to the court documents. Back in 21, Hahn said he discovered that Pfizer had spent over 10 times the amount of money on potentially influential government officials. So that's what Pfizer calls these people, pigos. It's their word, not mine, not the doctor's. Pigos are something in their files, influential government officials. In China, than the company had spent on those officials in other countries, the court docs state. Specifically, Pfizer spent 168 million on pigos in China between the second quarter of 2019 and the third quarter of 2021, Han's work found. That compared to 12 million in the US, 11 million in Canada, 7.5 million in Russia, and 7.1 in the UK. Even after Hahn brought the data to his supervisor, he claims he saw no evidence that Pfizer struck up a company investigation. Of course they didn't. Who's going to investigate themselves? Instead, Hahn said he was rated lower on a subsequent employee performance review. So this guy's job is to make sure no one's doing anything fraudulent, that they're keeping in compliance with the law. When he finds a big red flag, he's demoted, with his supervisor baselessly critiquing his work, berating him, this is quoted by him, and impeding his ability to perform his job, the lawsuit claims. After Hahn's supervisor allegedly screamed at him, it became clear to Hahn that Pfizer's, quote, statements and actions were in retaliation to his complaints about the fraudulent activity he'd uncovered, the lawsuit says. By May 22, Hahn said he'd received several negative performance reviews. Come August 3rd of last year, Hahn received a final notice of underperformance from the company, he says. He was ultimately fired November 2022. I mean, we all know that if you aren't going to play the game, there's been so many people talk about how disgusting Pfizer is. If you're not going to play the game, if you're not going to shut your mouth, you're not going to become part of the big boys club, you're out. Pfizer did not immediately provide a comment in the lawsuit, which was filed earlier this summer in the Superior Court of the State of California for the County of San Francisco. More recently, this case was moved to a California federal court. This isn't Pfizer's first run in with potential fraud activity abroad. In 2012, the company inked a 60 million FCPA settlement centered around its alleged conduct in Bulgaria, Croatia, Russia, and several other countries. Pfizer additionally disclosed more FCPA scrutiny in 2019 and 2020. And in its most recent annual securities filing, Pfizer said it was under investigation for potential FCPA violations in Russia and China. So I don't know about you, but I'm most concerned about Canada because I'm Canadian. The Chinese can fight out for themselves. The Americans, you guys should fight this out for yourself as well. We should do FOIAs, whether you live in America or Canada or wherever. We need to do FOIAs to expose and shame these Canadian officials that took the bribe. Thank you so much for tuning in. I do my best to expose corruption as often as possible. This one's important. Subscribe, like, share. Subscribe to my Rumble channel called Liberty Talk Canada. I'm on Twitter under Odessa Orlowitz and Facebook under Odessa Orlowitz. I will see you at the next show. Please make sure that we get this message out. Take care. Did you know if the banks do a bail-in, they can take the contents in your bank vault? But storing your gold and silver at home could be a huge security risk. Every day, our dollar is worth less and less. Inflation is stealing the only savings families have. Now more than ever, it's so important to hedge the savings you've worked so hard for. Banks have been failing all over the world, and social credit has all but arrived. But did you know you can do wholesale price vaulting
and retail delivery from the most prestigious, reliable company in Canada. Did you also know if you decide to leave Canada, your gold and silver can be sent right to you after you arrive to your destination? The only company I personally use and trust are those awake guys at New World Precious Metals. Take control of your family's future. You can just click the link in my show description or type in the web address libertytalkcanada.ca/gold to get on their mailing list, attend their webinar, or book an appointment. Let them know Odessa sent you.